Remember when Sega was great? You know, back when they were able to treat Sonic as a keystone instead of their whole identity like they do today? The good old days of Donkey Kong Country vs. Vector Man, Virtua Fighter vs. Tekken, and of course the battle of the century, Hey You Pikachu vs. Seaman. Oh, you don't remember? Well, neither do I. Now, I know full well that Sonic, and to a lesser extent Yakuza, aren't all Sega produces nowadays. I love Persona as much as the next guy, even though they are just the parent company. I know Football Manager sells like hotcakes amongst, certain people, not entirely sure who. And Valkyria Chronicles is one of those series I know I'd like, but just keep putting on for some reason. Let's see what else we got here. Puyo Puyo's in a pretty good place right now. And, oh, anybody remember Tembo? You know, the who considers himself to be quote-unquote badass. Okay, it's not that I view the company as a shell of its former self, but, well, I guess I am kinda saying that. Being born just months after the company's final console, the Dreamcast, was discontinued worldwide, I could never actually experience the company's console-producing Tood-written heyday. While I did own some gems like Sonic Mega Collection, Super Monkey Ball, and Sonic Generations growing up, there were still more afterthoughts than anything when compared to the hours I'd sunk into Nintendo's heavy hitters. In fact, I'm pretty sure I thought Monkey Ball was just some B-tier Nintendo franchise until I purchased the DS entry. But then, everything changed come Christmas of 2012 when my parents got me the Wii U version of Sonic and All-Stars Racing Transformed. Playing this game made 11-year-old me feel like a freaking archaeologist discovering a society long forgotten. Every character, stage, and even vehicle was a reference to some property I'd never even heard of, yet their designs filled me with the same nostalgia as anything Nintendo could have produced. Clearly, Sega wasn't just those guys who make Sonic, but rather a sort of alternate universe Nintendo, complete with franchises spanning all sorts of genres, art styles, and age demographics. Or, at least they used to be. Still, for anyone who's interested in Sega's history, especially the younger crowd, I can't recommend this one enough. The presentation alone was enough to get a lifelong Nintendron like me to actually expand my horizons a bit. Like, ooh, Crazy Taxi? Looks kinda like all I want to do in GTA, except without all the drugs and prostitutes. Nights into Dreams, what's this? Oh, just Sega's answer to Mario 64, you know, no biggie. Panzer Dragoon? Well, I love how grandiose the environments seem, and the third game is a JRPG. Alright, sign me up. Let's see here. Well, maybe one day. And then there was Burning Rangers. Honestly, its racetrack was probably one of the worst in the game, but there was something about that catchy theme music and sleek aesthetic that piqued my interest. The price wasn't much better than Sega's other late 90s offerings either, but I knew someday I had to play this game. Fast forward a few years and many failed emulation attempts later, and I finally took the plunge. With the region-free Sega Saturn in my possession, I went and ordered myself a copy of the game, which eluded me for far too long. So for those unfamiliar, Burning Rangers is a 3D action platformer released in 1998 for Sega's 5th generation console, the Saturn. It centers around a band of interstellar, jetpack-equipped firefighters tasked with saving people from dangers brought about by their own rapidly advancing technology. I believe it was a 3-week wait to ship my copy from Japan, and boy was it an agonizing one. During those 3 weeks, I accidentally developed a bit of an obsession with the game. I vigilantly dug through the forum posts, tirelessly listened to the game's kick-ass vocal tracks, and with an indefatigable spirit made a point to look deeply into each of the game's future cameos. I've never done this with any other game to this day, so what was the deal? How does any game about space firemen have the right to be this charming, and why has nobody heard of the dang thing? Well, I think I just answered my own questions there, at least partially. This, at its core, is a game about firemen in space. I mean, who wouldn't be down with that? If anything, I'm shocked there haven't been more games that use the firefighting concept. Come to think of it, this game kinda saved me from myself. Had it not been here to satisfy my urges to play and review firefighting games on the internet, what would I be left with? Alright, gotta admit, that bike does look pretty fun, but I digress. Edutainment bikes aside, this game really does evoke a charm unlike any other game I've played. The cutscenes, especially the intro, encapsulate this perfectly. Shots of the Rangers flying at high speed, dodging explosions, and saving civilians whisk about the screen while the game's main theme, Angels with Burning Hearts, blasts in the background, sung by the best man for the job regardless of which language you go for. The English version was done by Dennis St. James, a heavy metal artist whose roaring vocals fit the game's heroic nature perfectly, and the Japanese version was sung by the Daytona USA guy. Moving past the game's handsome aesthetic, there's actually a lot of really cool ideas to uncover here. The semi-futuristic setting prophetically brings up issues that concern scientists some 20 years after release, such as the ethics of genetic mutation and the possibilities of cryogenic revival. The characters also have backstories which range from tragic to gruesome, such as Big Landman here, the Ranger's token veteran member who essentially had to be rebuilt into a cyborg in order to recover from an accident early in his career. Fortunately, the only lasting side effect seems to be being about as jacked as the Saturn can render, so I'd say it was a fair trade-off. As is par for the course with Sega games, you don't actually get to learn much in the way of these characters' backgrounds unless you look into the lore. And by that I mean this PDF of the flimsy instruction manual I found online. Maybe there's some more stuff in the strategy guide, but it's Japan exclusive, unfortunately. In the case of Big here, I wouldn't have known much about him besides his oldness and burly stature if it weren't for his little character bio. This similarly applies to the game's two protagonists, Sho and Tillis, though their backstories are hinted at in-game so long as you choose to play as them. There's a few other faces you'll grow familiar with, such as Lead Phoenix and Chris, your navigator, and yep, these folks certainly are Burning Rangers. Yeah, they aren't exactly the most complex team of heroes, but do they really need to be? This is late 90s, early 2000s Sega after all, the kings of bright colors, space, and busting out the spunkiest jams to release just a decade or two from being culturally appropriate. It'd be a different story if the IP were to flourish enough to get its own anime, but alas. Let's just say you'd be hard-pressed to come across a fan who prefers their Crazy Taxi with Kingdom Hearts levels of depth. Burning Rangers at its core is a game about saving people as opposed to killing them. This isn't a dystopian universe, but rather a utopia that accepts the inevitability of human error. Each of the four main stages presents fires to smother, malfunctioning security robots to take out, and civilians to save, with a total of 108 possible civilians via repeat playthroughs. Once the civilians are found, they can be teleported to safety via the use of crystals, a collectible which also serves to power the Rangers' shields, essentially making them behave the same way as Sonic's rings. The game is quick to plunge you straight into the action, though not without a brief tutorial. This is because Burning Rangers goes beyond the typical jumping, flying, and spinning players we're used to in 1998. Not only can Sho and Tillis jump, fly, and spin, but they can also somersault, hover, dodge roll, and shoot fire-extinguishing lasers, all with a single button press. This may not sound too impressive nowadays, but for a game whose only competition was the likes of the original Tomb Raider and maybe Croc, it serves as a testament to its incredible ambition despite being developed for a failing console. Even more impressive is that, unlike Tomb Raider, Burning Rangers is silky smooth to control. Both Rangers feel incredibly agile, a trait only enhanced by the Saturn 3D controller's weirdly comfortable analog orb thing. The camera does leave a lot to be desired in narrow passageways, but considering most of the enemies presented can hardly be considered animate, it's almost a non-issue, save for a few frustrating moments involving robotic bees. Diving into Stage 1 for the first time is a bit like signing up for a college course meant to weed people out, only in video game level form. It takes only a matter of seconds once you're first given control to be met with a bout of explosions, which temporarily reduce the frame rate to slideshow levels. Sometimes the slideshows got so sporadic and pixelated that I began to wonder if what I was viewing wasn't the game itself, but rather the result of the CD drive's laser dying or some other hardware issue. But hey, still, this is Space Fireman we're talking about here, so most will be able to move past this. Now, if they can get past the explosions, however, players are then required to bear the burden of polygon glitching. This is also in the tutorial level, but its abundance in the first stage lets players know that the flickering tiles of their peripherals are a demon they'll have to bear with for the rest of the game. In other words, this game is rough. It takes a good amount of tolerance to get used to the sheer amount of jank involved in navigating these mazes, but for those who can push through lies something oddly beautiful, even today. What the game lacks in technical performance, it more than makes up for with brilliant use of colors, translucency, and lighting effects. I've even seen some claim that this is the best looking Saturn game, and I can't say they're wrong. I like to equate it to using a 32-bit kaleidoscope. Even the levels that'd be the most boring in real life, like an abandoned aquarium, can appear as psychedelic dreamscapes if you squint a little. Despite there being no main villain, each stage is also home to a boss or two, though they're nothing to write home about. They can be exciting at first if you play along, so to speak, by stunting around on your jetpack and doing your best to fire at just the right moments. In fact, I'd recommend this method at least the first time around, as not only is it a lot more fun, but you get to witness some of the most impressive graphical effects of the Saturn's 3D library as a result. The problem is that in actuality, a good chunk of the bosses require little more than a few seconds of jumping and thoughtless charge shots to be defeated. It's a bit of a letdown, though. I suppose it's nothing new looking over Sonic Team's earlier works. And to clarify, this doesn't apply to all bosses. The final boss, for example, is absolutely glorious, featuring multiple phases and a slew of attacks that force you to break out every stunt in your jetpacking arsenal in order to survive. It's a shame not all the bosses could be this fierce, but hey, at least their battle music makes it seem that way. It's because of aspects like the subpar bosses and general lack of challenge that some may be compelled to push Burning Rangers under the rug as a title that's all style and no substance, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Interestingly enough, like other Sonic Team works, this is a game the developers intended to have its appeal drawn from replay value, but not for the speedrunning aspect. Once the Space Demon is defeated, the game introduces a random level generation system, opening up new paths each time you replay a level so you can rescue more civilians. You're also graded at the end of each level, but it's mostly for how well you explored as opposed to how fast you completed it. To be frank, this is one ranking system I can't really get behind. It may cause me to never see certain areas the game has to offer, but for me, Burning Rangers is perfect as a one-and-done experience. That isn't to say I don't replay it, just when I do, I make sure to begin with a fresh save file. This makes the game more arcadey, and I guess Sonic-like to me due to the placement of everything being familiar. It also means I can play my original copy without running around in circles too often. You see, there's one crucial aspect of the gameplay I failed to mention until now, being the voice navigation system. Essentially, instead of a traditional minimap, Burning Rangers uses high-tech CD technology to have Chris verbally tell you where to go. I assume this was to make the experience more immersive, which it certainly does, when you can understand what she's saying, that is. You see, I'm not exactly the wealthiest guy in the world, so I decided to import my copy from Japan for a much more reasonable price. There were a lot of pluses to this, such as the inclusion of a full-color manual and mini soundtrack CD, but without any option for subtitles, I was completely lost when playing the actual game the first time around. I constantly run into dead ends only for Chris to scold me to turn back, but without a lick of Japanese to my name, she might as well have been saying great job or any number of things. It definitely soured my first impressions with the game and probably doubled the length of my first playthrough, so if you don't know some basic Japanese, I would just go for the English version. In preparing for this review, I completed a few more playthroughs, some on a CDR of the US release and another on an emulator. I know it's a legal gray area, but looking at the state of Sega now, they're the methods I'd recommend. Playing with the voice nav made a world of difference in how smooth the whole experience was, and in my opinion, no game is worth the amount this one is going for nowadays. In a message to the players accessed by rescuing him as a password-unlocked civilian after completing the game, head of Sonic Team Yuji Naka described Burning Rangers as a reflection of the bright future we're all hoping for. The irony in these words is unfortunate given the tragically short lifespan of the Dreamcast, which was soon to release at the time, but there's just something about this blind optimism, this sort of create a vision and stick to it mindset that I can't help but find charming and wish that it was present in more games today. If you've been able to keep up with gaming news despite all the craziness brought about by 2020, you may have heard of a little game called Balan Wonderworld. This appears to be the modern brainchild of Yuji Naka, now aided by his cohorts at Square Enix, with whom he's been working since 2018. While it's refreshing to see the Golden Age aesthetic alive and kicking after all these years, I can't help but be a bit wary of this one. While Naka and the rest of Balan Company have the art style and music down, what with all the Knights and Billy Hatcher inspiration, the idea of cycling through 80 different costume abilities in only 12 stages sounds a bit overambitious, not to mention the chugging frame rates, as well as stiff movement and animations which evoke the same sort of vibe as an underfunded Kickstarter game. Still, the gameplay shown has been limited, so I'd say it's too early to draw any massive conclusions. With some more polish, I could easily see Balan becoming one of this generation's major cult classics, or even better, an actual mainstream success. Who knows? Maybe in a few years we'll see the likes of Rise Star, Choo Choo Rocket, and even Burning Rangers living on as spiritual successors fronted by the men who started it all. But until then, all we can do is wait and see. Despite its obvious weak points, Burning Rangers is a grand old time overall, and a fantastic place to start for those newly curious about Sega and Sonic Team's history. It features an incredibly creative premise, some jaw-dropping visual effects, and a charm so irresistible that it only takes one playthrough for your nostalgia to rival the first game you ever laid eyes on. Here's hoping the best for Balan Company, and until next time, long live Sega.